What's up, and welcome to the No Bullshit Manifestation Show. I'm your host, Kat Kozad, manifestation expert, money mindset and fulfillment coach, and multiple six-figure entrepreneur. Come sit with me while I spill the real tea on what it's like to practice using intentional manifestation, demystify all of the woo-woo and confusing bullshit that comes along with creating the life of your dreams, and give you a realistic view of what it's like to be on a personal, spiritual, and professional growth journey. The goal of this podcast is to support and guide you towards manifesting all of your dreams, shed light on the things that people are too scared to talk about, and encourage you to become the person who gets to have it all, be it all, and do it all. I am so happy you are here. Let's fucking do this thing. What's up, loves? Welcome back to another episode of the No Bullshit Manifestation Show. Today, I brought Dani Mclean onto the podcast. She has an incredible podcast called Causing Friction that I had the honor of being a part of a few months back. And we talked all about my money manifestation journey and how manifesting money is so important for all of us. And after that powerful conversation with her, I wanted to bring her on to my podcast to talk all about her experience with money manifestation and money as a whole after her past and everything that she's experienced, because as you'll hear in this podcast episode, she experienced extreme poverty as a kid, and as she grew up, that experience not only impacted her finances, but all areas of her life. And it's been such an honor getting to listen to Dani and hear her story and everything that she's overcome, because I know that so many of you who are listening can relate to her experiences and what you've gone through. And knowing that it's so possible for you to heal from these different things, as Dani is such a perfect example of that. And as she has been able to really create beautiful transformation in her life when it comes to her finances and all of the other things that she's been able to accomplish. So through her own experience with PTSD, depression, as well as being diagnosed with borderline personality disorder as a direct result from trauma, Dani has personally found significant healing through practicing mindfulness. And this has led her to wanting to share her own experiences, pass along everything that she has learned through years of therapy and in life, and in turn, hopefully assist other people's healing journeys through her podcast, Causing Friction. And you can find the link to her podcast and the ways to find Dani down below in the show notes. But without a further ado, let's get into this podcast episode, and here's Dani. Alrighty, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the No Bullshit Manifestation Show. Today we have Dani on the show, and I'm so excited to bring Dani onto the show. I was on her podcast, Causing Friction, a few months back, and the two of us just absolutely connected on our story when it comes to money and our inner work journeys and all of the different things. So I know that I needed to bring her onto the podcast for y'all to fall in love with her as well. So Dani, thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for this. I love your show. I love everything you do. Your whole bubbly personality. Every time I listen, I'm like, yes, I feel motivated.
Yay. Awesome. And now it's your turn for everybody to fall in love with that, and you as well. So let's kick this off with your story of what has led you to who you are, where you are today, spreading the message that you share and making the impact that you make.
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, my healing journey, I guess you can call it, because it's multifaceted, but in general, my healing journey really didn't start until I took it seriously a couple years ago. So around 2.5 years ago, 3 years ago at this point, I finally decided to heal, and I finally decided to take it really seriously, because as we go through this podcast, you're going to see that my my childhood and the way that I was raised and I grew up was not necessarily normal. I come from a background of a lot of childhood trauma, abuse, and that has led to a lot of negative patterns, I will say. As an adult, I deal with PTSD. I have borderline personality disorder, depression. So there's a lot going on that I kind of felt overwhelmed when I would think of how do I even deal with all of that? Where do I begin? And one thing that I have worked on, and I made a really big priority now as an adult because I'm 29 years old, was really working on my relationship with money, which Kat is the queen of. And what was so important with me with this was that now as an adult, because I grew up very, very poor, I struggled with my relationship with money and I didn't necessarily understand that and what that meant. And what I will say to give a little bit of context, but not go into too much detail of that childhood, was when I say poor, I mean we went to food banks to get a majority of our food because we could not afford the regular grocery store. Most of our clothing was secondhand, hand me downs, Value Village, any kind of Goodwill that was available to us. And that also meant that sometimes at Christmas, our presents came from a local drive or church, or people sponsored us as a family. So you can imagine hearing all of that, how that's going to kind of affect the way that you view money when you become an adult and you really start to have something of your own. And what it did for me is just constantly make me feel like I was never worthy of abundance. And I felt like I always needed to give away what I had, because I just wasn't used to having any. I didn't know how to manage it, I didn't know what it meant. And I almost kind of felt like money was evil, not having access to it as a child for basic needs and hearing from other people, so parents and certain, relatives, the stories around people who were wealthy or people who were abundant, that they were almost evil, or because that they didn't give all of their money away, that they weren't necessarily a good person. So this really shaped my mindset around abundance, around accepting help, around finances even. So it's a really, really, really big all-encompassing story. And I'm sure everyone, if you're very into all of this kind of healing journey, you understand 80% of it starts in childhood. So you can imagine that this is definitely where it all started for me as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing that with us, because I can imagine the ladies listening to my podcast definitely do have very similar stories when it comes to their relationship with money growing up. And I think that one of the things that you just said in that really stood out to me, that is so powerful, is that your healing journey didn't really start until you started to take it seriously. So tell us, like, what does that mean that you finally decided to take it seriously? And like, what did it look like prior to that?
Yeah. So there was a very, very distinct point where I just got sick of my own shit. And it was empowering because it really put into perspective for me, I'm in full control of my life. I'm in full control of my finances. I'm in full control of my body, my being, my soul, my mind, every thought that goes through it. I am ultimately in control of that. And what I wasn't focusing on before was that perspective. I was focusing on everything happens to me. So I was very much in a victim mindset for a very long time, which anyone who does deal with trauma, you understand how that cycle kind of just sits inside of you. And it's really, really, really hard to break. But I'm so grateful that there was a conversation that I had with someone where it was my aha moment. Um, it wasn't a pleasant conversation. It was a fight with a partner. And he just looked at me and said, "You're literally doing this to yourself." And I stopped and I was like, oh, I hate that you're right, but you're right. First, it started with getting rid of him. But more importantly, it was like the Kickstarter of like, oh no, everything around me I have chosen to have in front of me. I have made poor choices that have led to that bad credit. I have made poor choices that have led to that overwhelming, crippling debt that I just refuse to look at and am ignoring and hoping it'll just go away magically someday. So it wasn't until I genuinely took it seriously and realized I'm not a victim in my life anymore. I'm not a child who has to lean on a caregiver to be taken care of. I can take care of myself. That is when I finally started taking it seriously. And I mean, I was only 25, 26 years old when I finally started to do that. So it's not like I was 19, 18, just trying to figure it out. Like I had many years of being an adult, but I just was so stuck in resentment and anger and blaming everyone else. I was refusing to take responsibility for my own actions that had led me into my circumstances.
Mm, so powerful to recognize. And it sounds as though that a lot of what you're experiencing prior to the healing journey are the impacts of growing up in poverty, growing up poor. So let's talk about the impact that growing up poor had on you. What were the major ways that you saw in your upbringing that this impact was coming together? Like what were the major things that happened that led you to the relationship that you had with money and the way that you lived prior to your healing journey?
Yeah. So the major things that really stick out when I can look at it from this side is that I looked at people who did have money not as an equal scale. And it's not to say that they aren't equal. I mean, yes, they might have more than you, but I just thought that that meant that it's almost like we both weren't human. It's almost as if that they were something above and beyond, and I was below them. And that was a struggle for me too, because, well, most people are above the poverty line. So it felt like everyone was better than me. And that's something really hard to deal with, especially in high school, being bullied for being that girl who had the used clothes or didn't have clothes that even fit right or who couldn't even afford lunches. Like that is all extremely damaging, especially as a teenager going into adulthood. And then also, what it really did for me was feel as if other people just don't care about you or they aren't going to understand you and you're not going to understand them. Because again, it feels like you're almost on two different playing fields. Like, how am I ever going to be able to date someone or be in a relationship with someone who did come from a place of abundance, or maybe they did have a slightly wealthy family? How could I ever connect with someone like that? And so I didn't. I would push anyone away who was even slightly different than my upbringing, which left me, I mean, constantly not able to make friends. I was not able to have any kind of solid group of friends until I was in college and I was on my own. And it really put me in a place of feeling stuck all the time. Like I could just never catch up and I could never be normal. I always kind of felt like I was odd or I was like the strange one. And I was always kind of on the outside of everything. And that was really difficult with money or not, just to not feel like you belong anywhere due to also a lack of finances. You can't be a lot of places. So it really all connects, unfortunately, with money. I know we don't really like to admit it a lot of times, but it is what makes this world go round. And it is something you need to be prepared to face and figure out a way to be able to afford life and to keep going. That doesn't mean it needs to be lavish, doesn't mean it needs to be crazy and over the top unless you want it to be. But it is a harsh reality becoming an adult that you do need to figure that out and face it no matter what your background is, no matter if you have no education in it, no matter if you have no idea what the heck any of it means. It is something that you have to face.
Mm-hmm. And the other thing that I hear in what you're saying is that like face it in the way of like your relationship to it and the way that you've almost created this like reality or perception of self based off of your financial status. Just like you were saying, is like pushing away relationships with people who had money, or who came from greater than you did because of the perception that that relationship with money created for you. And I know you've probably heard me say this 1,000 times, and people listening to the podcast have definitely heard me say it 1,000 times, but that's why I always say that oftentimes money manifestation has literally absolutely nothing to do with money and everything to do with our relationship to ourselves, because it completely spills into these other aspects of our lives. So in the position where you started to heal and heal your relationship with money, heal your relationship with yourself, what were the first steps that you started to take?
I think the biggest part for me was not being embarrassed or shameful of where I came from, because I can talk about this now. And while it still makes me a little like, ooh, to admit where I came from and the way that I lived for so many years of being poor and eating from food banks, like admitting that out loud is difficult for anyone, especially now when I am, 29, and maybe there were certain people from back then who didn't really know what was going on with me, and then they listen, they're like, oh, it's a lot to deal with shame. And I think shame is deep rooted in everything we do. It's going to stop us from doing so many things in our life. And I really came to terms with the fact that I was very shameful, and that's why I stayed in a victim mode too and blamed everyone else, because I was ashamed, I was embarrassed. And then I also had to look at what was my specific thoughts, values, anything, my perception of money, because the only ones that I had were what was bestowed upon me from being poor and having a parent who also clearly was in that same, scarcity mindset and everything as well. So becoming an adult and realizing, okay, like that was her, and it's her trauma, generational trauma also going through me because she grew up poor. The cycle continued, and I realized that I need to break that cycle, and the only way I can start is facing it, admitting it, releasing myself from shame that I didn't know any better, that I was a child. Like I had random jobs as a child just to help pay for things when I was 9 years old in the household. Like I had to also come to terms with, like, that's not normal. Living in a first world country, that's not necessarily something that you would expect you would need to do. So it was a releasing a lot of that, and then coming to terms with the fact that I can have my own perception outside of what my parents think. And a lot of people struggle with that in love, in family values. They think that whatever their parents have taught them, they kind of just roll with it, and they don't second guess it and decide what is truly for them and what isn't. And what I realized what wasn't for me with what I had been taught is that money is evil. People who are abundant and have wealth are evil. And that was a really hard one. And sometimes I still actually struggle with it, to be honest, because I am someone who, okay, I am at a point where I feel abundant and I have extra resources to me. I feel guilty on a regular basis that I have it and I'm not giving it to someone else to do good with, or I'm not doing the good and passing it along. So it was understanding also that in order to come to a place of wealth and abundance, I needed to realize I was worthy of it just as much as someone else. And that was really, really hard, because I just felt like the second that I had money, I wanted to give it away, because I was like, one, am I worthy of this? Debatable. Two, if I have this, why should I be keeping it and holding on to it? Like, I just need to immediately give it away and try to help someone else who's in the same position of me. But that also just perpetuated the cycle of keeping me not in a place of abundance and keeping myself in worse positions, because I just didn't know what to do with it. And I realized it's because I felt like I didn't deserve to hold on to it. I felt guilty too much, and getting rid of some of that guilt has been really, really difficult, even to this day.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for that level of like vulnerability on all of that, because that's definitely not something that we hear enough of, especially like in our space of personal development and like in the manifestation community, is the fact that like anybody who has these unfortunate financial circumstances growing up or has any sort of relationship with money that is less than ideal, we all have our shit. And to recognize that there's levels to it, that like you had to come to this place of awareness and willingness to look at it in the first place to get to the position that you have an abundance, you have extra resources, and still feel some sort of level of guilt around it, is like growth, and that it gets to continue to get better and continue to be more healed throughout it. But I think that there's such a huge misconception when it comes to like healing journeys, that you do this work once and it's one and done, and like you're done with it and all is well and all is said and done. And that's like simply not the truth, as we're continuing to step into the highest and greatest versions of ourselves. And I know that that's definitely true for me as well. Like there's money anxieties that come up. There's still limiting beliefs that I face as I continue to go to greater levels. So what are some other ways that you still see like the limiting beliefs or the programmings that you experienced from your childhood show up in your life today?
So I think a lot of mine are around spending money. So, as someone who also has depression, we all know that depression and instant gratification go hand in hand, and we try to do anything to make us feel better instantly instead of focusing on a long-term solution. And spending money is the easiest instant gratification that you can have. Um, so I've had my instances of trying to manage my depression and manage my money, and sometimes it doesn't work out. Sometimes I overspend and my credit limit is slightly exceeded. And I'm like, how am I going to pay for that this month? And so it's interesting to see the way that I have tried to reprogram myself from learning to undo that negative pattern, because that's not easy either. Like, that's a whole other area that goes past just, okay, like my childhood and those beliefs. This is now my adulthood and how to deal with mental health. As a kid, we're not really, well, I know I wasn't really taught anything about. I didn't understand it would be something that I would face or have to truly learn to understand. Um, and then I still have a lot of limiting beliefs around the entire conception and what it means to be wealthy. Um, I had to do a lot of inner work, and I am still working on what wealth means to me specifically and what abundance means to me specifically, because I do find myself in comparison mode sometimes. I do find myself kind of having the classic, I want to make $1 million by this age, but then I don't understand why, and I don't have any fuel behind it, and I don't actually have any real plan to that. It just feels like that's something a wealthy person would want to accomplish and want to do. And what we were talking about before we started recording was my recent moving to Colombia. So I moved from Toronto to Medellin, Colombia for 2.5 months. And that right there showed me a different form of wealth and abundance, because it's not that doing that cost me $50,000 or anything so a big price tag that I would consider crazy wealthy in order to do something. But at the same time, to me, being wealthy and having abundance meant I was able to still pay for my apartment in Toronto and not have to give it up and move to another country and be able to pay for an apartment there and live life without being scared. Live life without having to 100% second guess every little move I make. I'm not calculating food at the grocery store anymore, because that was a big one for us growing up as well. We would have a cart and we would be picking up items and we'd be calculating it as we go, and then realize we only have $20. So this needs to go back. This needs to go back. This needs to go back. And that to me, not being able to do that anymore is the biggest win and the biggest form of wealth for me. Like if I look at my fridge and I have a full fridge of food, I feel wealthy today. And it's really been changing my mindset around what does wealth mean. But that's also going to be a constant battle with social media. Um, you're always going to see someone who has something that looks more expensive or feels more expensive, a little more luxurious trip, and just feel like you're not good enough. And it sucks, but that is the reality of the world. And it's something that if we aren't conscious of and we're just constantly looking, that's somewhere really good to maybe to start and understand, like, why do you want that? Why do you feel like you need that? Or why do you feel like you can't have it? Because why can't you?
100%. And in both of those things that you said, both of those examples, the level of awareness in them is so huge that, like, with your relationship to money, there's this level of awareness that, like, what is going on in your inner world? Are you in a depressed state? Are you in a happy state? Like, what is the different emotion that you're in? And what impact does that have on money and the way that you interact with money in your life, as well as what you're saying, like this definition and understanding of like what wealth means for you. Because yes, like our world is filled with all of the different examples of how we can feel like we're never going to have enough, or that what we do have isn't good because of what society is always conditioning us to believe we should have. And really being able to step into this place of power inside of yourself to create this level of awareness of like, what does wealth mean to me? And your example is so beautiful to look inside of your fridge and have a full fridge of food and be like, this is wealth. To like, I know one of the ways that I always pay gratitude is like, as I'm going on walks, it's like, what are the different things that money has allowed me to do right now? Oh, I have shoes on my feet. I have clothes on my body. Like I was able to brush my teeth this morning. All of those different things like money touches. And I think that it's beautiful to be able to create that understanding of like wealth for ourselves and growth for you, especially from like where you came from, to see like, wow, like anything is actually possible. If you're able to make it this far, why not be able to take it to the places that you want it to be? So if you could name like one thing that has been the most helpful or the most powerful for you in your healing journey, like what has been that thing for you?
I think the biggest and most helpful reminder that I give myself on a regular basis, which I hope makes people laugh because when I first said this out loud to myself, I was in tears. When I think of all of the money in the world, where does it come from? Thin air. We no longer are a society that the World Bank operates in gold bars. That's how they used to deal with money, and that's how every country had their money. Now we live in a society where every single country is $1 billion in debt, and it's from the sky. It is from literally just politicians writing down numbers. So, doesn't that just mean there's an infinite amount available? So, doesn't that just mean that your possibilities are endless if that's the way that the world is going? So when I started thinking like this, and I realized that a lot of companies kind of operate in a similar way. And if you're someone who works for a company, it's really empowering to think of it this way because it will make you ask for what you deserve or more because it makes it not scary. It almost makes it comical that I could be getting paid an extra 10, 15, $20,000 just by asking and having conviction and realizing that you are worth it, that you deserve it, and just having the confidence to even ask. People, what I've noticed in so many years of also working in a corporate world and working my way up is that people just won't ask. They're too scared. Either they're scared of rejection or they just ultimately do not think that they deserve it. And I just started acting and knowing in my deepest being that I deserve this abundance. I deserve moving up. I deserve the best of the best in front of me. And when my attitude started to change and I really started to work on that, and I became fearless in asking for what I deserved, I have not heard a no. I have heard nothing but yeses, and not just maybe we need to negotiate, maybe we need to talk about this. Confident, automatic yeses. And it truly is because I started with thinking, where does all this money come from? Is there a limited resource of it somewhere in the world? No, not really. When you think about the economy, yes, there's a recession. Yes, things are going to crash. But at the same time, where is all of this money even coming from? And that to me was just the aha moment I needed. And it kind of gave me almost like a false sense of confidence going into conversations. But then when I got my first yes, it gave me the confidence, like the true confidence that I needed. And once you start to kind of like collect yeses from people, you get like this nice, really big pile of confidence inside of you, and you just feel unstoppable. And you ask for what you deserve. And then when you get the occasional no, you're like, okay, then got to figure out how I can make that a yes somehow, because you just feel empowered to do so.
Mm. Mm. Oh, I love that. And that's such an empowering perspective to have, especially going back to what you're saying of like coming from a traumatic and super challenging upbringing to be able to shift into having that perspective and having that embodiment for yourself moving forward. So question for you is, what do you feel like are things that our society and world doesn't understand when it comes to trauma?
Oh, so much. I think the biggest thing that I've had to explain to people who don't have any kind of understanding of mental health because they don't deal with any mental health conditions themselves is that trauma actually physically alters your brain. It alters the way that you, for me personally, will perceive danger due to like childhood abuse. And that means that I am more prone to being in dangerous situations because my red flags don't actually go off. And also, that can be directly related to money. I don't realize how in danger I am with my finances because my sense of danger is so far from what the normal scale is. And anyone who suffers from trauma, you're going to see that you just don't either react the same as other people or the way that you're supposed to. You're going to notice that your norm is just not near anyone else's. And I think that's the biggest thing is our society is tailored to fit one kind of person and kind of one box of people. Even working like 9 to 5 in a corporate world, I think we've come to realize productivity doesn't work that way.
Yeah.
And just like people with mental health, you can't just be expected to be ready to go okay every single day either. So I find it interesting that we still work in such a old school, stagnant, everyone is the same. Everyone's diet should be the same. Everyone's workout regimen should be the same. Like it just blows my mind that we also expect people who have been through trauma to operate the same.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And going back to what you said on like the financial piece, to like be able to quote unquote function or deal with money in the way that it's presented to us as a society, which is like definitely one size fits all and definitely very infused with shame, and therefore like creates an even more challenging dynamic with it. And for you to get to where you're at and like have the relationship that you have with yourself and have with money now is so honorable. So for anybody who relates to your story, what's one piece of advice that you could give them to encourage them on their journey?
I would say if you are ashamed of your current financial situation, whether that is because of your past or your present, whatever has gotten you to where you currently are, you need to be able to look at it head on and very, very clearly lay it out in front of you and sit with that for a couple of minutes, a couple of hours, and just look at it because you need to bring it back into your conscious awareness. It lives in your subconscious. If you don't look at your financial statements every month when they're sent to you, or weekly, your bank account, your credit score, monthly, whatever it is that you maybe should be doing on a regular basis to ensure that you are in a good state of finance, the biggest thing when you have shame is you don't look at any of that on a regular basis. And what you need to do if you're embarrassed or you have shame around any of it is sit with it. As painful and uncomfortable as it's going to be, you need to do it first. And if you're uncomfortable bringing it up to someone, whether you're dating someone and you don't want to tell them, or you've moved out of your parents and you're scared to tell them, you can be scared. It's okay. But you need to be honest with yourself. And you can't keep ignoring it because we all know you try to run away from your problems, you try to ignore something, you're going to come back 360 full circle, and it's going to end up right in front of you yet again, time and time again. No matter how many times you run away, you're going to be running in a circle, doing laps, and it's always going to come back around. So take space, make yourself in a safe space as well, like physically in a safe space, whether that is, somewhere in your bedroom, your dining room, something that makes you feel comfortable and at peace, where you're not going to allow yourself to feel shame and guilt and then kind of have it stay and linger. You need to sit with it. You need to go through all of those emotions, and you just need to look at it and say, this is my situation. I am admitting it. I'm bringing it from my subconscious to my consciousness, because we all know if you have debt, or if you're not sure if your credit card is going to work when you go to the store, that is sitting in your brain 24/7. You're going to have bad dreams. You're not going to be able to sleep. It's going to affect you in so many ways. So you need to bring it from your subconscious into your conscious awareness, sit with it and go through those motions alone. And then when you feel comfortable, to either bring in a financial advisor, start talking to even someone like Kat, who can be like, hey, like, let's work on this shame together. People are there in those professional settings because you're not going to know how to deal with everything. Just because you want to fix your relationship with money doesn't mean that you're going to become someone who works in accounting in the next year. Like, those things don't have to coexist. There's professionals for a reason, but more than anything, sit with those feelings yourself and become so incredibly aware.
It's like most powerful advice that anybody could give is like being able to sit with that and work through whatever is there, because yeah, you're so right. It's like, it's not going to magically fix itself. It's not going to magically go away just because we want it to. And for our listeners, to like paint the full picture for them, would you be open to sharing with us like what you've been able to create for yourself financially since sitting with your shit and dealing with it?
Yeah. So the fact that I can even say this out loud makes me so proud. And I still feel guilt a little bit because saying it means that I'm holding on to it and not giving it away. But I was in debt with school. Here in Toronto, we have something called OSAP that will pay for your schooling and then takes a million years to pay off because the interest rate is awful. But I paid off around $20,000 of that. I had a credit score of 480 and now it's 750, which was very difficult to do. I've been living on my own since I was 19, so it's 10 years. I have RSPs. I have multiple investments, which is also pretty crazy. And I'm just at a point where I'm understanding the importance of kind of spreading those finances. And I'm getting to a point of now that I'm comfortable with money and I am accepting this as a form of self-love also for myself to take care of myself in my future. I'm getting to the point of education and seeing what else I can do to kind of go past just where I'm currently at and really also kind of take an interest because I do want to be set up to have a future where I was just talking about. I want to be able to look in my fridge and always have it full of food, or I want to be able to go and move to another country for a couple of months. And it really does take, going past just, okay, this is my money story. It's then taking it that step further when you're ready to.
Yeah, absolutely. And on that, what are like the personal goals and intentions that you are wanting to manifest for yourself, for your life, for your finances moving forward?
I think that the biggest thing for me is to become my own boss. That is always going to be, I think, a big goal that I have. And for me, that doesn't mean necessarily a number, but it will mean that I need to get to a certain point of being self sufficient or having enough saved where I might be okay to make it on my own for a couple of months without having potential income. So that means I need passive income, or that means I need investments that are just going to sit there and make money for me to have my nice backup in order to do so. And I think that should I be on the right track, that will happen within the next year, which is very exciting. Um, but I think that's going to be the biggest one for myself is I want to be able to feel self-sufficient, be my own boss, and kind of feel like the sky is the limit. I do feel that while I am working up my way in corporate jobs, there is still going to be some kind of limit there just because you are working for someone else at the end of the day and you're working towards their financial abundance. So I'm just hoping I can kind of turn that around, do it for myself. And then my ultimate goal is to hire some family and friends into that and keep it within the people that I love.
Love it. So powerful. And this has been such an awesome conversation. Like I was saying, I know that so many people are going to resonate with everything that you've been sharing. So, what is one last piece of no bullshit advice that you could offer up to everyone listening?
I would say that when you are dating, or if you are single looking to date, or you have a long term partner, I think it is so incredibly important to look at the way you both talk about money, the way that you talk about finances, and also the way that your partner reacts to your success. I have been with people before who were very jealous of either myself getting a promotion, being offered a job, anything to do with me moving ahead in life. And I noticed that keeping those kinds of people around was keeping me in my scarcity. It was keeping me down. And the second that I surrounded myself with people who not only were happy for me, but praised me, boasted, even if I was making more money than them, let's say, if we had those open conversations, it wasn't oh, well, why don't I have that? It was strictly them being happy for me and then it almost motivating them in their life. And now what I notice with getting rid of, some relationships that didn't serve me because of that scarcity and that jealousy, now my whole circle is thriving. My partner is thriving. All we do is work each other up and boast about each other. And we're so proud of each other. And it's created this almost like ping pong effect of he's succeeding, then I'm succeeding. Then it's like this beautiful back and forth and celebrating each other. And that positivity and that energy is something that's going to go a really, really, really long way in your healing journey. And it doesn't have to be something super drastic, even. It could be, I have 2 job interviews next week. I didn't necessarily get them, but at least I had those 2 interviews. Like, celebrating successes is something we need to do more of in so many different ways, shapes, and forms. And if you find that when you try to celebrate a success or you tell someone of your success, their energy doesn't match yours and you're being drained by them, it's time to go. Like, and I'm going to say that bluntly, like, don't keep those kinds of people around, because you're going to be stuck and you're going to find that you're not progressing in your life, and you are who you surround yourself with 100%.
So fucking powerful. And also just another prime example of the fact that like money manifestation oftentimes has absolutely nothing to do with money, but just like you said, the people you surround yourself with, the ways that you talk about it, the ways that you celebrate your wins, and so many other things. And you've provided us with so much wisdom in this podcast episode. So thank you so much for that. Where can everyone listening find you? And do you have anything going on that they can be a part of?
Yeah, absolutely. So on Instagram, social media is Causing Friction Podcast. I'm actually starting a mindfulness early morning group for accountability. So I'm going to be posting that soon on social media. So you can also look out for that. And I do release new episodes ideally every Monday, but sometimes life gets in the way. So it's every other Monday. But I do release a lot of podcasts around trauma, healing in all different forms, whether that's money, relationships, the relationship with yourself, self-love. It's everything mindfulness for millennials.
Amazing. Yay. And I will link all of that down below. So anybody who wants to connect with Dani and listen to her podcast, Causing Friction, you absolutely should. It's such a powerful podcast. If you love my podcast, you will love her podcast, because it is all things that is going to help you excel in your life. So Dani, thank you again so much for coming on to the show.
Thank you so much. I could talk about this for hours.
Same. Oh my gosh. Thank you for listening to today's episode. I'm so grateful to have these no bullshit talks with you. If you enjoyed today's episode or the podcast as a whole, please spread the love by leaving me a review on iTunes or sharing the podcast with others. This is how I will be able to spread more of these good vibes and be able to make more of an impact on the lives of others. And if you're not already part of all of the goodness and communities that I have to offer, check out the show notes. I have links to the different ways that I can support you on your manifestation journey and help you live a life full of more money, fulfillment, and freedom. But that is all for now. So big love and hugs, and I will chat with you soon, babe.